I am constantly trying to seek out interesting people that I can talk to and have conversations with and learn from. I figure that if I listen enough, by the end of the conversation, I not only know the things that I know, but I know the things that they know as well. Well, on this channel, there is a playlist called Conversations with Interesting People, and I've talked to all kinds of interesting people in the podcasting world, men like Ed Ayers and Dan Carlin, and have really learned a lot. I also had a conversation earlier in the year with a guy by the name of Alexander von Sternberg, who is the host of an outstanding history podcast called History Impossible. Well, after that conversation, we ended up talking for like another hour or hour and a half, and I guess there was something that I said in the course of that conversation that really got a snowball rolling for Alexander and led to his most recent podcast episode on the Spanish flu and how that tied in to what happened in Germany in the interwar years. Anyway, I had a chance recently to follow back up with Alexander. We basically just picked up right where we left off in our conversation back in the spring. Fascinating individual, fascinating conversation. I always enjoy talking to him because I feel smarter by the time I'm done with the conversation because he seems to be a way more interesting person than I am. So anyway, here it is, the second part of an ongoing conversation between myself and Alexander von Sternberg of History Impossible. Here we go.
When was it that we talked last?
When was that? Yeah, that was like...
Was that pre-shutdown?
Things had started. I think this was like back in... Wow, I'm blank. I think it was April, May, something like that.
All right, so maybe it's in the middle of it then.
Yeah, I think it was in the middle of things because it was, I think by then it had become clear because I was talking about how nothing had changed for me. And still the case, nothing's changed for me. So yeah, it had to have been post-March. So I think it must have been like April or May or something. Might have even been June. I really don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, it was somewhere in there. I was trying to think about that. I guess I could have went back and looked at the file.
Yeah,
and figure that out.
Yeah, who cares though? Yeah. I mean, it's 2020 has been very strange. I mean, to say the least, it really has gone by in a blur. I think I'm like, oh, it's December now. What's happening? I mean, I feel bad for, I don't know what the weather's like where you are, but in California, things, as you know, don't really change weather-wise. It just gets a little bit colder. And so that kind of has added to the surrealness of everything. But yeah, it's been really wild, and I've done this already. I did it even on my podcast, but I'm going to do it again. I'm blaming you in that conversation we had for the 6+ hour monstrosity that became my pandemic episode, because you set me on that path by recommending Pale Rider to me by Laura Spinney, and I got to tell you, that is a hell of a book. Yeah, that is a great book. I really think if anyone's curious about, specifically about the Spanish flu, so-called Spanish flu, definitely read it. But if you want to read a harrowing global size story about a pandemic, I don't think it gets much better than that.
Yeah, it's that one. I've got a few other books on the flu pandemic. But I haven't read them yet. That was the one that I had read, and it just kind of knocked me back on my heels whenever I read it, mainly just seeing all of the parallels, everything that was kind of a mirror of what we're seeing now. I even told my wife. So in the book, it talks about how there's this initial hit that was in the spring, and then during the summer it leveled off. Things got better, and in the fall it ramps back up again. And I said I wouldn't be surprised if in the fall or early winter we see like this wicked resurgence.
And here we go.
And here we are, going through the same thing again. But no, I listened to that episode whenever I was up in Maine, whenever I was driving back and forth. So the 6 hours didn't bother me at all because.
Well, I got a really nice message on Patreon from one of my patrons, from a truck driver, and he was saying that and all the other episodes of mine that are way too long for their own good. He says it's kept him awake, kept him sane during those long stretches. And, yeah, that was really gratifying to hear.
Yeah.
So,
No,
yeah,
it was really good.
Thank you.
And yeah, just the way that you kind of thread things together. So even whenever I kicked that idea out to you,
yeah,
I would have never thought that it would have went, the direction that it did.
Honestly, and this is really silly. This is really silly, but I remember thinking when I started reading Pale Rider, I was like, I'll do like an hour and a half. This will be a short one. And it became the biggest thing I've done. Yeah, I just read too many, and it was also what we were talking about how the consequences of it arguably set the tone or set the groundwork even for the rise of Nazi Germany. I had no idea how much it did. I'm not going to pretend that that's an open and shut thing. It's actually, I've found myself facing social media controversy from people. I'm sure you've seen some of it in some of the groups we're both in, of people, for whatever reason, not understanding what I'm saying. They always just say the Spanish flu was in 1918. And I'm just like, I know that's not what I'm saying though. I'm saying that it was in 1918 and the effects lasted for 15 years.
Yeah.
Arguably.
Something else that was in 1918 was World War I, and it had a direct effect on the beginning of World War II.
Well, the one really crazy story that I talked about, and I don't think you and I talked about it, maybe we did, but was Woodrow Wilson getting the flu, and how that arguably affected the entire, peace accords, the Treaty of Versailles, and how it shook out and was so punitive against Germany. I quoted and talked with a fellow podcaster, CJ Kilmer from Dangerous History podcast. He's what I would call the closest thing to an expert on Woodrow Wilson that I know. He's not a fan, to say the least, because he's doing this multi-part, multi-hour series of that he calls his dangerous villains, or dangerous history villains, rather. And I think at this point he has 5 parts on Woodrow Wilson now. Maybe, by now it might be. By the time this goes up, it might be 6. I have no idea what his pace is. But anyway, I consulted with him on it, and I was like, is it possible that this changed the course of everything? And he said, I don't know, but it didn't help. Yeah. Him getting the flu did not help. So it's really weird to me how little there seems to be how little consideration there seems to be of how epidemics, pandemics, illness in general alters the course of history. Yeah. If you want to talk, this might slide a little easily into our conversation about historical memory. I'm sure there's not that many books about the flu pandemic of 1918. The only, and besides that, a lot of people didn't even know that there were pandemics in 1958 and 1968. I believe those are the years. Yeah. There was Hong Kong flu and Asian flu. Yeah. And those have now been surpassed by COVID, but they were there. The only real plague people talk about is the plague, and that was 700 years ago. Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, for whatever reason, and I did talk about this in the podcast and with CJ on the interview he did with me recently, that for whatever reason, we just seem to want to forget pandemics. Because I really do think, and how World War I was happening at the exact same time as the quote unquote Spanish flu, the high drama of the war is going to overshadow it no matter what. But at the end of the day, I think there really isn't much high drama with sickness. There's no winners, there's no losers. Everyone's just a loser.
It's an invisible enemy.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's the deadliest. It killed more people than the war.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Way more.
If we look at the upper limit, 100 million people, I can't do math in my head, but based on that's a significant percentage of the world's population at that time. That's a lot.
Well, just think of 100 million people dying from COVID today, or anything, illness or pandemic. If 100 million people died worldwide today, everybody would be floored. Even more so than what they are now.
Yeah, we want to move past it as soon as possible. That's why I think when I've heard people say that when COVID is over, things are going to be so different. we have a new normal. I hate that phrase, new normal, but
Yeah.
I look at that and I'm just like, not really. I think we're going to want to move past it as fast as possible. People are going to try to act like nothing happened. And that's not a criticism or anything. I just think that I'm starting to think that that is our default as a species, is something that an invisible enemy, as you say, it's like once the invisible enemy is gone, we just want to just pretend it's gone forever.
Well, I don't want to downplay,
Sure.
COVID or any of the tragedy that, anybody has felt, whether it's people who've died from it, or
Yeah.
people who've
Lost
lost
loved
their
ones.
jobs,
Yeah.
or
Jobs. Yeah.
whatever. But again, not to be insensitive, this is nothing compared to past
No.
pandemics. Our great grandparents would love to have this one compared to what they had.
Yeah. Yeah.
This one, we're not, well, in my own family, if you go to my mom and dad's house, there's a picture that's hanging of these two little boys. And growing up, I always heard the story about Emmett and Gilbert, and those are the two boys in the picture, and their parents buried them. It was within months of each other, and they were 19 and 21.
That's the age that it was hitting hardest for a lot of people.
Yeah. So imagine if we had a pandemic or some sort of virus or something like that killed people on the scales of the flu pandemic, and its target was young, healthy, vibrant people.
Yeah. I mean, it that has happened to a much lesser degree with COVID. And I believe they think it might be because of the same kind of thing that was affecting a lot of young people during the Spanish flu, the cytokine storm, as it's known, where I was shocked to learn. And this was actually, I think Laura Spinney actually talked about it in Pale Rider, that it's essentially a genetic defect that I think 1 in 10,000 people have. They only discovered this like within the last decade, I want to say, with the little girl in France who got violently ill from just a simple flu virus. And the doctor figured out, oh, it's because her first line of immune system defense doesn't exist. She doesn't have, the initial antibodies going out. So it just jumped straight to inflammation. And that was causing her more harm than the actual virus was. And, that's a scary thing to find out, that there are just some people who lost a genetic lottery, for when an illness hits them. I mean, it doesn't always happen, but when a particularly virulent virus, hits them, it's going to hit them hard and probably kill them. And that was scary to read.
Here's one thing that I've wondered through this, and I haven't really found much to answer my question. I mean, you've dug into this way more than I have. I know that people are kind of asking the question, will things ever go back to normal?
Mm-hmm.
And I have to wonder, the people that lived in 1918, 1919, 1920, did they think this is it? Like this is what life is like now?
I mean, that's, hard to say, because again, there's not that much out there.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to rely on, the stories being passed down, like through the generations. I'm assuming, I mean, did you get a chance to talk to your relatives, like who might have lived through it, or their descendants who lived through it, and they remembered anything about it?
So my great grandpa, who would have been the younger brother of the two boys that died, he would have been a little guy whenever that happened. But again, I was pretty young. So for somebody to say, oh yeah, this is Emmett and Gilbert and they died, in the flu pandemic. Okay, well, I was 8, 7, something like that, whenever they were telling me that. So, I don't really have the critical thinking skills at that point to say, hey, let me investigate this a little bit more and see tell me more about this.
Yeah.
In my mind, I'm like, flu pandemic, they died from the flu. That's weird. And then, I go on about, playing with my toys. But so to answer your question, I haven't talked to anybody that lived through it. And of course, those people are all gone now.
Well, I got to wonder that too, because I mean, I don't know the answer if like people thought it was a permanent fixture of life. I bet some people did, just because that's how people handle, stress, they wallow. I mean, I'm assuming there were people who felt that way, but what I do know is how, well, really what happened after that, especially in the industrialized West, which is the Roaring '20s. And what that says to me is they were trying to put it behind them as fast as possible. And that was no exception in Weimar Germany. I mean, they really amped up like, I guess we could call it cultural affluence as much as they possibly could. People were buying stuff left and right. They were buying radios, cars. They were going to the movies. I mean, the German film industry in the 1920s is arguably one of the best of that time period. I would argue that. I love German expressionist cinema from the 1920s. It was very creative and very much influenced, I think, by things like the pandemic, the revolution, the uncertainty and everything. It was just this, I see the 1920s as this sort of decade of denial, and sort of like how World War I overshadows the Spanish flu, the stock market crash in 1929 overshadows, any possibility that there was something else going on. A sort of trying to move past destitution. I think it was trying to move past the flu, the war, everything. It was just a very traumatized decade. And again, not to, echo what you were saying, not to downplay what's going on now with COVID. We're probably lucky that it's not as devastating as the flu pandemic was, but
oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think we're in for, supposedly we're getting a vaccine by the end of the year, beginning of next year, and it will probably have been distributed, as long as there aren't horrible side effects we don't know about yet. It'll be distributed probably to most of the population by the end of 2021. So if that's the case, I can't imagine a different scenario than the 1920s playing out in the 2020s. I really can't. Yeah. And that's where I still feel kind of dumb that I had to say this in my podcast, because it just feels so on the nose. But that's why I kept saying and wanting to stress to anybody who would listen, Donald Trump is not Hitler. If there's an American Hitler, we haven't seen him yet.
Yeah.
And he's probably a decade away, if there is such a thing. And again, it's not a one-to-one comparison. Who knows what's going to happen in 2030? But, that's when I'm going to get worried, is if we start seeing a nationalistic demagogue show up who everybody seems to really like, or not everybody, but a very significant number of the population seem to like. And the problem is, I think a lot of people calling Donald Trump Hitler is going to produce a boy who cried wolf kind of situation,
to where you don't, whenever the real one comes up, you don't know. Yeah.
And that's where I do see the early Weimar Germany comparisons being very valid. I mean, I just finished and put up an interview I did with this young writer, Aaron Siberium.
I listened to that yesterday.
Yeah, it was a really fun conversation. It blows my mind when someone 10 years younger than me is like just so wicked smart, but he wrote an essay called The Weimarization of the American Republic. And it was so weird. He picked up on the exact same thing I picked up on in the comparisons of our two societies. And the weirdest coincidence of all, he posted that essay the same day I put out my episode.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I never heard of him before. He didn't know who I was. So when I reached out on Twitter, I was like, this is very strange, but bear with me here, because we came to the same conclusion from very different spaces. But he, I think he really nailed the comparison too. And he's also very keen to say, this is not one-to-one by any means, because I think historical precedent is often mistaken as a claim that something is one-to-one. And I don't think any serious historian or even fan of history is ever saying that. I think they're just saying, look, this is very similar.
Well, and that's why I have a problem with so much of what I see and hear now in relation to the pandemic. I saw a meme the other day, and I've seen it circulated, and I've seen it several times, and I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was something about being against mask wearing.
Yeah.
Which I'm middle of the road whenever it comes to that. But anyway, it said, it had like 3 different pictures, and one of them said, just put on the mask. And then the next one, the progression was, just stay at home or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then the next one, a black and white picture of Jews being loaded up on a cattle cart. It says, "Just get on the train." And
Oh man.
I'm like, well,
dude, yeah, that
it's like, okay,
just
that's
how many times have I said to you, you're making my blood boil? Because that is just, that is infuriating.
we have a little bit of a jump. There are several steps between putting on the mask and getting on the cattle car and heading to the concentration camps. And that's where you say like that 1-to-1 ratio.
Not even close. Yeah. In that sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
The one thing that I do worry about is how politicized, not just mask wearing, but how politicized a pandemic became. But at the same time, I get the feeling that that is not the first time it's happened. And interestingly enough, there's really not a lot about the pandemic that gets talked about in the historical record regarding the German Revolution. I can't imagine it didn't come up in day-to-day life because it was happening at the same time as the revolution. But I do worry, though, that by making something as silly as a mask a political statement, that we're setting ourselves up for something really ugly down the line. Like, I don't like that we live in an era where politics is pathologized. The politics of your enemy, quote unquote, is pathologized. I mean, the fact that it's even called an enemy is kind of disturbing, but friendly combatant, I don't know, is a better way of looking at it. But I really worry that the fact that people have made masks a hill to die on is just so weird to me. I don't like it. I don't like that there even is an argument beyond just personal discomfort. Like if you don't like wearing a mask because, you feel gross wearing it, I get it. I don't like it either. But, at the same time, I don't want to get sick and I don't want to get other people sick. So it's a balancing act.
I get it from the standpoint of people don't like to be told what to do.
Yeah, especially Americans. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't like a government figure telling them what to do. So I get it from that perspective. But to jump right into to go from there to Auschwitz is a little bit much. But
I have a segue for you. This is very clean.
Right.
I find it very ironic that the only time people seem to even know what Auschwitz is or the Holocaust is when they're making a crappy comparison to it like that. And then everybody else just doesn't even seem to know like that. Well, around almost 12 million people were murdered by Germany back and her allies, of course. But like, I am still kind of shook by your story in your video, the first video where you talked about the vandalization of Currahee Mountain.
Oh, yeah.
And you were saying that you were talking to these girls and they didn't even know about World War II, which is even more mind-blowing to me. But at the same time, I'm going to cut them slack. They were like, what, 13, 14? They weren't very old. We were all dumb kids at one point.
They drove up there.
So, 16 at least, unless they were
17.
Unless they were illegally driving, which is possible. But that on the one hand, I'm like, let's give them a break. But on the other hand, I'm like, how dare you, But that's just me being a history nerd and especially a World War II and Holocaust history nerd. I mean, that's a weird thing to say, but I've been fascinated by the Holocaust ever since I learned about it in high school because we had a class called History of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Like dedicated to the Holocaust. And it was this incredible experience for me because, well, I think it also made me very bitter about human nature to a degree. And that was only intensified when I took a class in college about the history of the Holocaust. And I don't know, but it really has been drilled into my head. So I do accept the fact that, maybe some kids just don't know because a lot of kids don't like history. I get it, but it's very important, especially when the only, like I said, comparisons to the Holocaust being made are really sloppy and don't make any sense.
Right. So just for the sake of context, if anybody's listening on your podcast, so I had an episode on the History Underground YouTube channel where went to Camp Toccoa at Currahee. For people who aren't World War II nerds like me, or maybe haven't seen or heard of the series Band of Brothers,
I still need to watch that. I'm admitting something right now. I've never seen Band of Brothers.
Oh, we might just need to end this right now.
It's on my list on my HBO app. I mean, I want to watch it and The Pacific back to back. That's my plan.
It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal series, but it's about this company in World War II called Easy Company. They were in the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, and they have this just incredible story where they started off training in Toccoa, Georgia, and landed behind enemy lines in Normandy on D-Day. And
were they am I getting this right? Is that Operation Market Garden, or is that before?
No, this was so they landed behind Utah Beach on D-Day.
Okay. Yeah.
And then at September of 44 was Operation Market Garden.
Okay, I'm mixing two things up.
Yeah, and then they fought in the Battle of the Bulge. They were in the Bastogne perimeter, completely surrounded, and their story ends at Hitler's Eagle's Nest.
Oh man,
so they go from Normandy to the Eagle's Nest. Incredible story. A book,
and it's all
written.
True. Yeah,
and it's all true. Yeah,
yeah.
So a series was made on HBO. Let's see, that was in 2001.
Oh yeah, it was like almost 20 years ago. Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, I went to this site to see where they trained, and hiked up Currahee Mountain, which is kind of like this kind of iconic piece of the training for those men. They even named the 506. They nicknamed them Currahee. Whenever I got to the top of the mountain, there's just, long story short, there's just graffiti and vandalism everywhere, and you can see it in the video. It's pretty awful.
Yeah,
but I ran
especially like the Hitler comment.
Yeah, the one that said "I love Hitler." Yeah, that was pretty awful.
Edgy teens, you know.
Yeah. But I ran into 4 high school girls up there, and they were spray painting, and doing their thing. And I started engaging in conversation. Said, "Hey, do you know about the history of this area?" They knew nothing, and started explaining it to them. And the more I talked to them, the quicker I realized that they legitimately knew nothing about World War II. So I kept asking them questions and saying, well, what about this? Or have you heard of this? Or have you heard of that? It finally got to the point where they had heard of Adolf Hitler. They had heard of Adolf Hitler. That name was familiar.
Yeah. Like watch an Indiana Jones movie, guys. Come on. Like at the very least.
So anyway, yeah, that was pretty unsettling. And then a lot has happened since then, getting stuff together to try and clean up that area. But the bigger issue is kind of this loss of historical memory. And that's not the only story I have of
course. Yeah, you're a teacher.
So
that makes sense.
Well, I mean, just another short one. Last year, this time last year, I went with my church to an elderly residential care facility, and there was a gentleman there that I knew, whose name was Lou, and Lou landed on Utah Beach on D-Day, and I had interviewed him and got his story and stuff like that. So there were these 4 girls who had gone through an AP history class.
Oh no,
AP U.S. history class.
Okay,
and I said, hey, that guy in there, I said, his name's Lou. And I said, he's at that point, he was 98 or 99 years old.
Wow.
And I said, he's a World War II veteran. And they were like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. I said, yeah. I said, he actually landed on Utah Beach on D-Day. And they looked at me and they said, what's D-Day?
Oh God. That hurts my brain that they were in an AP history class and they said, what's D-Day?
Yeah.
Like it's US history too. Like that's what you talk about when you talk about the US involvement in World War II and the European theater. You have to talk about D-Day.
Yeah.
It was a tide turning moment. You're getting me mad again.
Well,
it's good you were there to tell them. I mean, at least they know now.
So I take the comments that I got on that video from Currahee. I've had people say you should have kicked them off the side of the mountain. You should have done this, and you should have done that. Everybody resorts to violence. They didn't know. They were simply uneducated. Maybe I should kick their teacher off the side of the mountain. No, No, not really.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that revealed to me that, man, we've got some gaps
Mm-hmm.
That need to be filled.
Yeah.
And whenever you look at the Holocaust, there are some disturbing gaps there too, of
Yeah.
things fundamental things that people don't know, but they should. You recently went to a Holocaust museum
I did.
in
Because
Dallas.
Dallas,
Remember you
yes.
telling me that?
I believe the name is the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. I think that's what it's called. So it focuses not just on the Holocaust. That's like the main exhibit. Right now, I believe they're doing an exhibit on the civil rights movement in America.
Okay.
And it's like right across the street from the book depository, which has its own museum, which I didn't go to. I'm actually kind of mad. I didn't have time to go to both. So I picked the Holocaust one because I'm just more interested in that than I am in the JFK assassination, which is a fun story. Don't get me wrong. I shouldn't say it's a fun story, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Dallas History, Holocaust and Human Rights Museum is a really amazing place. I can't recommend it to you enough next time you're in Dallas, if you get down there ever. But
I would love to go there.
It's a really great museum. The focus is the Holocaust. They have, you've seen my Instagram. I've been posting photos from it at this point, I've been posting them for about a month, and I still have many photos to go through. But it covers like so many stories that I didn't even know about. Like there's a really disturbing one about the Nazis going into Norway, and they went so out of their way to get the Jews in Norway that they went to the northernmost synagogue on the planet. I believe it's on the planet. And it was just to get like 13 Jews up in this little tiny town. Yeah, it was, I don't have the name off the top of my head, but I am going to post the picture I took of it at a certain point. I actually kind of even want to try to do a podcast about it because it's just such a disturbing and crazy story that they went so out of their way just to get like a dozen Jews.
You're saying that, and I want to go there.
To the synagogue, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's still there. I think they probably have like a museum up there too. I don't know the details of it, and I can look for it when we're done here, and I can send you the name of it. But yeah, that story obviously stuck with me because I remember it. Yeah, and not to tip my hat too much because it's going to be the series. I'm going to do my first series. I'm opening 2021 with, but they cover the Balkan campaign and how the Balkans were a hotbed of anti-Semitism within themselves already. Like the Croatian Ustasha movement was virulently anti-Semitic, and they were a very scary group of people. They were so scary that even the Nazis looked at them and said, "Oh, okay." They were like, these guys are scary. These guys are crazy. So yeah, it's and I'm going to be talking about a lot of that in my upcoming series. And but they talked about that in the museum. They had a whole little corner dedicated to that. It was really interesting. Yeah. So it was a really great museum. I'm trying to think of like what else was in there. Oh yeah. And then there was a room at the end that was truly amazing because it then had, I think I told you about this. They had these little displays of that signified and had some blurbs and backgrounds about other genocides throughout history. They had Pol Pot in Cambodia. Mm-hmm. They had the Soviet Union. They had China in the Great Leap Forward. They had Rwanda and Armenia, all the big ones from the 20th century. And it was really amazing, like aesthetically too. In fact, I'm probably going to post the first picture from that either today or tomorrow or something. So you'll see it's really cool. Very sobering, very serious, but it's still very cool. And it's interesting too, because it did get me to think, because I've always had kind of trouble labeling China's Great Leap Forward as a genocide, because it had the effects of one, but the impression I get, and this is, just coming from talking to my members of my family who are Chinese. I mean, my partner, Molly, she, I believe she had an uncle or two who died in the Great Leap Forward. And because that was only in the 1950s. It wasn't that long ago.
Right.
And it I believe it. The sense I get is that it was something done by an incompetent leader. Like he actually thought what he was doing. Mao, in this case, thought what he was doing was right. I don't think he was setting out to kill up to 100 million people. I just don't think that that is reasonable to assume based on what I know, but I could be wrong. I have been meaning to read the definitive Mao biography by, what is her name? I think her last name is Jung. I'm not sure. It's like she and a partner wrote it together, and it looks really interesting. And apparently they make a very compelling case for Mao being very deliberate in what he was doing, but I don't know. But it was still very interesting to see that called a genocide at a museum and making a very compelling case for it too. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
I've had the opportunity to hit a few different places that are tied with the Holocaust, one of which is the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C.
Of course, that's the definitive one. Yeah.
Yeah. Which
it's amazing.
Yeah. Which is absolutely a phenomenal place. And then a few other places. So where the Holocaust, like the epicenter of it was, Eastern Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I spent quite a bit of time in Ukraine, and they have a museum there. They don't call World War II. They call it the Great Patriotic War. So they're in Kiev. They have a museum called the Museum of the Great Patriotic War. Well, there's a huge section that's dedicated to the Holocaust there.
Wow.
And like in one section, you're going and you're looking at all of these artifacts, and at one spot you see a pair of like leather gloves, and my friend who was with me and translating and everything, he was kind of helping me out because I can speak Russian functionally, but my reading is poor.
Sure. You got to memorize what, like 55 letters or something?
Yeah.
It's something crazy.
Yeah. So he said, "You see these gloves here?" And I was like, "Yeah." He said, "These aren't just any regular gloves." He said, "These are made from human skin." And there's just all of these horrifying things. And then are you familiar with the massacre at Baba Yar?
I might be. Remind me.
Okay, so whenever the Nazis were moving through the Ukrainian part of what was then the Soviet Union, they sent out a notice calling all Jewish people in the area to come and report, bring, I think like one bag of luggage or something like that. And they brought them to this ravine that was called Baba Yar. And, this is before, like, this is, the Einsatzgruppen. It's working. So this is before like the large scale killing centers, like Auschwitz and everything. And then proceeded to one by one systematically kill over 33,000 Jewish people
in one sitting. Yeah.
In one city.
There are famous pictures of this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then I have seen it, and I hate to say it this way, but all of these things just start to blend together.
Yeah. No.
And I mean, and it did for the men too. I mean, I'm sure you've read or heard of Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning. I had to read that book for one of my Holocaust classes, and I remember by the time we got to the point, I might have been the Baba Yar massacre they were even covering in that book. I can't recall, but we got to this point where they were describing these zigzag trenches that they had forced the prisoners to dig before shooting them into them. And I just remember just feeling numb by then. I was just like, I can't like even process this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like mass scale serial killing, essentially. It's really weird. And I get the feeling that's how the soldiers felt ultimately, because in that book, that's really what I love about that book is it opens with, I believe the commanding officer of the 101st Police Battalion. And he's just breaking down crying because he's just been given the order, you have to kill all these people. And he, I believe, even gave his men permission to say, I'm not going to do it. Yeah. Which is very fascinating because it does add a layer of complexity to the Nazi regime, or the men who were Nazis is a better way of putting it. And it humanized them, and then also made what happened afterward all the more horrifying, that they still did it
that
And
it wasn't these hardened
no,
Nazis.
there were, there were kids.
Yeah, bankers.
Yeah.
People worked at a bakery, police officer, regular. Well, hence the name of the book, ordinary men.
Yeah.
That's what makes that whole thing all the more chilling.
Yeah.
Whenever we were there at Baba Yar, you're standing there and you're looking, over this ravine, and my friend told me, I forget when it was this happened, but he said that there was some sort of building complex or something that was going to be going in just across the street. And he said whenever they started digging for the foundation, they started digging up bones from victims of that massacre. I mean,
that's remarkable. Yeah.
Just absolutely horrifying. So,
well, I don't get the sense, and this is sort of a silver lining, I guess, not for Americans, but that it's kind of impossible to forget, World War II and the Holocaust in Europe, especially in places that directly affected it. I don't know anything about German education, but I would imagine it's like you have to learn about it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just whitewash it. I mean, for all I know, that's a law. I don't know. I mean, I know that in Germany it is illegal to be a Holocaust denier, which on one hand, I'm like, good, screw them. The fact that I've actually encountered a number of Holocaust deniers in some history groups online is just like, or skeptics, quote unquote, is just so disturbing to me. And that kind of leads into, or it adds weight to what you're talking about with historical memory, because when you have poor historical memory, don't even really know what Auschwitz is, you're more likely to find more people who are like, I don't know if this Holocaust thing is all that accurate. How do they know? Well, millions of documents. That's how. Photos of, Baba Yar. I mean, it's insane that people would even deny this kind of stuff. But anyway.
Well, I've also been to Dachau. And seen, the killing centers there. So let me go ahead and destroy your faith in humanity a little more.
What little is left.
So there was a study that was done earlier this year. Or I'm sorry, the results were released really within the past couple months.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. So I wrote them down just so that I could get them exact.
Thank you. Thank you for destroying my faith in humanity, or confirming my loss of faith in humanity.
So here are the numbers. They were trying to gauge between millennials and Generation Z. So the one right after millennials, what their functional knowledge was of the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what they found. 63% did not know that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust.
Of Generation Z, or of both groups?
Both groups. Yeah, this is both groups all lumped together. This is both groups lumped together. So 63% didn't know that 6 million Jews were killed. 36% thought that less than 2 million were killed. 48%, and this one just blew me away, 48% could not name a single camp or a single ghetto, in spite of the fact that there were over 40,000 of them. They can't name one. You would think that Auschwitz or Dachau, that's like the big E on the eye chart. And this is the one that is going to shut you down. 11% of people of those surveyed from millennials and Generation Z thought that Jews caused the Holocaust.
That's not even just loss of faith in humanity. That's just me thinking that 11% of my generation and my girlfriend's brother's generation are anti-Semites. Like, that's just like, I mean, I'm not going to say that. I shouldn't impugn motive on them, but I'm just saying, it's just, how could you assume that the victims of a genocide caused the genocide? That just seems so weird to me that someone would even think that.
So here's my question to you is, how does this happen? How have we gotten to this point where like 63% don't know? Like, that seems like the big E on the eye chart. That 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust.
It's a failure of education for sure. I mean, I don't know what the process of becoming a history teacher is, like what you're supposed to know or anything. I don't know. I would imagine that there's some sort of failure in that quote unquote supply chain somewhere along there. But I actually think it's also a failure of culture, because the last Holocaust film made in English, at least, so I don't want to generalize the rest of the world, but the last American released Holocaust film that I can think of was The Pianist in 2002. There might have been another one.
When was The Boy in the Striped Pajamas made?
Oh, wait, yes, that was 07. Yeah,
Okay.
so still a long time. I mean,
Right.
This is all pre-financial collapse, which, I mean, I'm going to focus on film a little bit because that's kind of my wheelhouse, I think, is that after the financial collapse, filmmaking risks went down. And that's when we started to see the rise of reboots, big tentpole franchises, and Marvel, basically.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I'm not just throwing Marvel under the bus. In fact, technically it wasn't them producing them, but I give the I think it's 20th Century Fox, which is now owned by Disney, and whatever. Point is, I give 20th Century Fox a lot of credit for having the Holocaust be a major plot point in the X-Men films, especially in the first one.
Yeah.
The first X-Men film does not feel like a superhero film when you start it, because it's showing the young Magneto and his parents being led into either a ghetto or into a straight up death camp. I don't remember which. And then he finds his powers and bends the fence with his
Arbeit macht frei.
So I guess it was Dachau, or no, that was in every camp, right?
Yeah, I think if I remember that right, I think they kind of recreated the entryway to Auschwitz.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think it is Auschwitz. I do think so. So that actually was 2000. So I was 14. That was, I think, the first thing that awakened me to the Holocaust. I mean, it's a hell of a scene. It's an amazing scene. I mean, the movie's great too. And I believe they actually did it again in X-Men First Class in another flashback.
Yes, I do remember a scene where Magneto is like in South America hunting former Nazis.
Yeah, and that's fun. That's what I love about the Magneto character, is that they instantly, at the very beginning of arguably the first superhero film, successful one ever made, they make you sympathize with the villain, because they show what horrible things he went through, and you're just like, yeah, I would be bitter too if I was in his position. And I give that movie so much credit for, even more than Schindler's List. And I think Schindler's List is a fine film. And my favorite Holocaust film, again, a weird thing to say, but my favorite one is called The Gray Zone. And it's about the Auschwitz uprising in 1944.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's a very small film. A lot of really famous people. Harvey Keitel plays the camp commandant with a pretty good German accent. David Arquette, Steve Buscemi. Yeah, it's really good. Look it up. It's worth watching. It's just, you need to have something funny or pleasant on tap afterward, because it, in my opinion, is the only honest Holocaust film that I've seen, because it doesn't pretend that there's a happy ending. That's sort of why I find Life is Beautiful so insulting. Is that it's like, I get it, and if you like it, if someone likes it, no shame on them. It's just, for me, when I watch a Holocaust film, I want to feel like crap afterward. And but anyway, like what I liked about X-Men doing that was that it awakened me to something that actually happened, and then got me to watch other movies that were covering the same topic. And then it then it got me to want to learn about the actual event. And what I'm realizing is not just that I'm not like most people. I'm a glutton for punishment, obviously, to a degree. That's what most people who like history are. But I think that the fact that our culture doesn't even feel like the movers and shakers of our culture feel like they're not even trying anymore to like, I mean, again, I can't remember the last Holocaust film besides Boy in the Striped Pajamas, as you pointed out. And I'm sure there are more in Europe, but that's not here.
As far as like a big budget everybody's got to go see this type movie. I can't think of any or identify any as well.
Only Spielberg will save us, I think. maybe we should petition him. Hey, dude, just make a Schindler's List 2 or something. Come on. Please help us out here.
I mean, to your point, so one, I agree with you that there's some failures in the education system.
Sure. Maybe you can provide some insight on that too. Without naming names, of course.
So I can see this on the inside. A little bit that I'm trying to say this in a way that's not too abrasive. So
I'll read between the lines.
A trend that I'm seeing increasingly that I'm finding more and more disturbing is this wave of, for lack of a better term, activist teachers who see their role as not to teach and to instruct and to guide. They see their role as to push a certain ideology.
Ideology first and then history second.
Okay, so earlier, like at the very beginning of this, we'll tie all this kind of together. We're talking about people who say that Trump is Hitler.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you believe that Trump is Hitler,
literally, that'd be really funny if someone literally believed that.
Yeah. Well, then
reincarnated.
You're going to see your role as an educator much different. That oh my gosh, we have to prevent the next Hitler. So I see this disturbing trend of activist teachers. And there's an individual, I won't name his name or his book, but he's an educator that wrote a book that's pretty popular, that most people in the education world will probably recognize if I name the book.
Sure.
But I went to a conference that he did one time, and in it he said, and he's like this wild, dynamic guy and everything like that. And he said, and he was a history teacher as well. And he said, I know I'm going to offend like all of the history teachers here. He said, but he said, I don't like teaching about the wars at all. He said, I'm more interested in, teaching about the struggles of the marginalized people throughout history. And
somehow wars don't cover that. Like, what's he talking about?
Yeah, exactly. So now I'm not against teaching those things. I think,
of course,
I think absolutely we need to teach about, all of those stories and all of those people and things like that. But what I'm seeing is that people are shifting, not all teachers and not all schools, but there's a shift towards history education being a narrative of the oppressor and the oppressed, and the haves and the have-nots. And the result of that is that World War II and some of these other bigger conflicts and stuff like that get sidelined a little bit. So, I mean, I had somebody respond on that video where I talk about the graffiti and everything like that. But he said that whenever he saw it, he thought, I need to ask my grandson what he knows about World War II. So he asked him. The kid knew nothing, he said. Now he knew about all of these different social history things, and things like that. For lack of a better term, the activist part of history, which is important and which should be taught, knew nothing about World War II. So whenever you don't get that foundational knowledge, it's not surprising that 63% don't know.
No. Well, and that's interesting too. And I'm not going to, assume motive or malice here, but it's interesting that you have activist teachers, to use that term again, who want to talk about the oppressor and the oppressed. Why are they not talking about the Holocaust? That's the ultimate expression of oppressor and oppressed. Like if that's what you're like, if that's what you're dedicated to opening young minds to the idea of oppressors and the oppressed, you have to talk about the biggest one of all. And then if you want to go even deeper, you have to talk about what Stalin did to the kulaks. And I get it because it's not America and they probably want to just focus on America, but it seems it feels like it's not even really about talking about the oppressor and the oppressed. It's about pushing an ideology.
Yeah.
And that is disturbing because in my mind, let's just say you want to focus on America and you want to talk about a group of people who were oppressed. You can still do that and talk about the war. The one that comes to mind immediately is a story of the Harlem Hellfighters. Yeah. Like completely discriminated against. I don't know the details about them, but I know that they're a very significant part of African-American history. Very significant. And they fought in both wars. Very important to history. And how they were treated is very important to the idea of looking at how there was an oppressed group of people who still fought for their country.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, I think I was listening to Jocko Willink and Daryl Cooper on the Unraveling podcast. I think it was them. Yeah, it was there where they were talking about like Jocko was bemoaning how like, why are we not talking about the insane numbers of Black Americans fighting in the Civil War for the Union to free their brethren down South. It's an inspiring story. Yeah. And it's not even just an inspiring story. It's inspiring stories. There's thousands of stories about that. We don't know every single one, but we can talk about this stuff and it will uplift and educate and it will give us a better idea of what oppression actually is. Like again, I think what you're hitting on is definitely true. It's not about education. It's about activism. It's about ideological possession.
Well, there's two different ways to teach American history. One is that the United States is an inherently great place, but that it has people in it who have not always lived up to that greatness.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can look at slavery, you can look at Jim Crow, you can look at massacres of Native Americans. Okay, I could go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Does that mean that there's something fundamentally flawed with the United States itself, or is it something that's fundamentally flawed with the people in it? Okay, so that's one way of teaching it. The other way of teaching it is that the U.S. is inherently evil from the beginning, from its foundation.
Yeah.
And that it's this Howard Zinn look at American history that, it's nothing but old rich white guys oppressing the rest of us. So whenever, and there's a lot of people increasingly in high school history classes that are adopting that second narrative. And
again, there's nothing wrong with that narrative if you counterbalance it with other things. You know what I mean? Right. Like, which essentially is what you're saying the first method is. It's a counterbalance.
And what people say is, they look at that first one and say, "Oh, you're whitewashing history," or this is just some nationalistic view. And I would disagree with that. I would stand against that teaching of history. Anything that tries to omit any of the flaws or some of the horrible things that have done, under the banner of the United States.
Yeah.
But so I mean, just like with anything, the best answer is probably somewhere in the middle, where you teach, hey, America is a great place with great founding principles. We haven't always lived up to that greatness.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're kind of seeing some of these gaps, is that there's one, just like if a history teacher were to get up and completely omit anything about civil rights or about the struggles of the working class or anything like that, you're going to have some huge gaps in American history.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting some big gaps from a swing to the other end as well.
That is seemingly sort of the sort of, I think that sort of identifies the age we live in, which is an age of, well, I'm not going to pretend that there was some golden age where we lived in nuance land, you know. I mean, I don't think that that's ever existed, but at the same time, it just shows how we tend to be as Americans. I'm only going to generalize about Americans. We tend to overcorrect quite a bit. You know, because I'm assuming probably before our time, especially, but you know, even into our youth, because we're close to the same age, if I recall. I think, you know, there probably was a sort of dearth of critical education out there, and that was bad. So then as our generation and the even younger generations get older, they start, you know, pushing against that. And I get it. I get the impulse, but that's not what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to just pick up Howard Zinn, read it, call it a day and say, yep, that's the reality. That's how things are. No, you don't do that. That's not how, in general, that's not how education should work at all for any subject, but history especially. I mean, I think the more I talk to you, but also the more I just talk to people in general about history education, or just people not knowing about history or having a bad experience growing up, I just thank my lucky stars for the teachers I had, because I was so lucky. I had teachers who did exactly what you're talking about, the middle way, essentially. I remember, I think it was 10th grade, American history class. It was AP US history, actually. And my teacher, this older guy in his 60s, I think at that point, we spent a whole day talking about Thomas Jefferson. The guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence literally said that slavery was, I believe he called it an evil institution, I believe were his words. Kept his slaves.
Yeah.
Like, and I remember he left us with that. He just said, what do you think of that? And we broke it down. We talked about it. I mean, there were some of us, I think myself included, who were like, screw him. He's a hypocrite, because he was a hypocrite. But as I've gotten older, I've thought, you know, that just makes him a more interesting character. I mean, it allows us to speculate about his motives. It allows us to, you know, have the very tough discussion about Sally Hemings, who, according to a lot of scholars, you know, namely the ones who really love Thomas Jefferson, so should be taken with a grain of salt, but according to scholars, was very much in love with Thomas Jefferson, and he was very much in love with her. But how do you square that with the fact that she was his property? It's very difficult. And I think just people are too scared to embrace difficulty. As dumb and simple as that sounds, I think that's what this is. Well, I really think so.
Even with Jefferson, while he was president, the transatlantic slave trade expired under his presidency. So here's a man who owned slaves, but celebrated the end of that. So what I, you know, whenever you say, you know, like your teacher said, what do you do with that? Here's what I try and teach a little bit of humility with people. I said, the clothes that you're wearing right now were made probably by some child at worst, or at best somebody working in a sweatshop for substandard wages.
Yeah, in Indonesia or wherever, for like 3 cents a day. Yeah.
Is that moral or immoral? You know, you are going to go to some fast food restaurant. You're going to drive your gas guzzling vehicle there. You're going to eat your food, and then you're going to throw your trash, which is going to go to some landfill. Is that good or bad for the environment? Bad. I said, people 300 years from now will probably look back at us and be horrified at the way in which we conducted ourselves. They will say, how could they wear clothes that they knew were made by slave labor?
A child. Yeah. I like that example. Yeah.
Or how could they just take trash and send it down to somebody else
and burn it?
And burn it. How could they have polluted their environment? And they will look at us. There's something that we're doing now that people 200 or 300 years from now will look back at us and say, those people are monsters. How could they have done that? But we're kind of trapped.
Yeah, you're trapped in the present. Exactly.
In the present.
Yeah. If I had it on me, I'd hold up my iPhone and say, right there. That's a horrifying thing that I am taking part in consciously. I am fully aware of what's happening at Foxconn. I'm fully aware of the nets they had to put down so people could stop killing themselves under the horrible working conditions there. I'm taking part in that because I like my toy.
Yeah.
And as dark as this is, that's what Thomas Jefferson was doing. He liked his toys. And those toys were horrible. They're not toys, they're people, but that's what he liked. And he was trapped in the present.
Yeah. And again, not defending it. I'll probably post this and you'll have the podcast and people will say that I'm a horrible person that was defending slavery. I'm not. But if you were to tell Thomas Jefferson or any slaveholder, hey, you need to turn these people loose, they'd be like, how am I going to make money? How am I going to harvest my cotton?
Yeah.
As immoral as it is, that's where they were. Now, it was an evil institution, and honestly, it was bad for the economy.
Yeah, it was bad for everybody.
It's bad for everybody. It's bad for everybody. What are people going to look back at us and be critical of?
I think you listed the best examples, and as well as the iPhone example I listed. I think those are some really good examples of what people are going to just be horrified by.
Yeah.
It does make you wonder though, like it will also depend on who's in charge though, know? So it'll depend on, I love predicting the future because it's fun to be right, but when the future does play out the way you expect it to, but I also am worried that if I start predicting things going one way, they will not go that way, and I will be horribly surprised afterward. And that's why I think there is a lot of value in looking at history, is because even though, as we were saying, there's no one-to-one, it's a very good indicator though of how things can go.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you say, we have all these things that we like and take for granted and that people are going to look back on with horror. I'm not sure where I was going with that actually, but I was basically just saying that I think that we should have a little bit of humility for what we think is right and wrong, because I don't think we really know. I think people try to look at the present through a historical context, which doesn't really make much sense. The way they do it. And that is a problem. And I think that when you're teaching activism or being an activist disguised as a teacher, you're essentially trying to do that. And I don't like that. It makes me very uncomfortable. And I don't like that we don't have a counterbalance in the culture right now either. Like we were saying earlier, like about movies and stuff.
Yeah. So I was getting ready to circle back to that because we have an education gap. Yeah. And I like that you said there's an entertainment gap as well.
Yeah.
So take somebody that was born in 2001, whenever Band of Brothers came out. Okay. So for people in my generation, we had Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
Had Band of Brothers.
Thin Red Line.
To a degree, Schindler's List. I mean, that was still pretty fresh by the time Band of Brothers came out. For somebody that was born in 2001, for let's say a 15-year-old kid, so after 2001, what do they have?
Boy in the Striped Pajamas when they were 2 years old. That's all they got.
Yeah, not much. Now there was a series that was just released on Netflix not too long ago called The Liberator.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet, but that I actually looked into that story a bit when I was doing my Dachau Liberation reprisal killings episode. The book rather. Yeah. So I'm assuming it's good.
It's good.
Okay.
It's really good. Now for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a 3-part series that follows the story, real life story of a guy named Felix Sparks. And of course the series kind of
Felix Sparks.
Takes some liberties with the actual events. But it's kind of this quasi animated.
Yeah. It's series. Like rotoscoped, I think, right? Where it's like real people, but they painted over it with CG or something.
Yeah. Which it takes a few minutes to get used to that. But once you kind of settle in, it's good.
Yeah.
And I've wondered, after I finished the series, I was like, man, could that be something for this generation, or could there be something similar?
Maybe, yeah. I would like to think so. Yeah.
That this generation could latch a hold of,
Yeah.
because I mean, there's not a lot.
No.
Band of Brothers is ancient history too.
Yeah. We also, the Pacific, I believe that came out in 2010, but that, is just one little thing. That's one series. And I do want to give credit to, I believe it's Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, like usual. I think they're doing another series about the Air Force. Am I getting that right?
Yep.
Or that wasn't the Air Force yet, but
yeah, the 8th Army Air Force. It's called Masters of the Air, and it's covering the bombing campaigns over Europe, and I'm super pumped about that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering if they're going to get into like things like Dresden and get into the moral gray area of all that stuff too, because that would be really interesting if they did.
It definitely would be. I think part of, well, I shouldn't speak on it because I don't know for sure. I've just heard rumors.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would definitely be an interesting take if they go some of those directions.
Yeah. I mean, I would hope they do, just because, Dresden's another one of those stories that I wouldn't blame anybody for not knowing. It's a very specific story, but it's also very morally complicated. And I only know about it because I read Slaughterhouse-Five in high school. So I was just like, what's he talking about? So I looked it up and I was like, oh, or the firebombing of Tokyo, arguably way worse than the atomic bombs, way more savage.
Killed way more people.
Yeah. I mean, it's there's another podcast out there I want to shout out. It's called, I believe it's Historium. They did one covering the firebombing of Tokyo, and it was only like 38 minutes long. It was haunting, completely haunting. I can't recommend listening to that enough if people want to learn more about the firebombing. And I'm sure Carlin's going to get into it with his final part in his hardcore history series on the war in Japan.
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to that and seeing how he.
Yeah. I'm planning to listen to all 6 parts once they're out, and then listen to his Destroyer of Worlds special after that, because it sort of serves as a nice epilogue to the getting us into the atomic age.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's going to be cool. But and that actually is, let's be a little optimistic here. We have people like Carlin, huge reach, huge audience. Yeah. Everyone loves his work for the most part. And he's keeping history alive. I'd like to think I'm helping out with that. I'd like to think you're helping out with that. I mean, the history content creation space is so amazing. And I really like that it's growing, and it is growing interest with people. It's getting people to even want to do podcasts. That's how I started doing a podcast, was because I was such a fan of hardcore history, History on Fire, Martyr Made, all the good ones, and I found even more because of that. Another example of my mind being blown thanks to historical podcasting was the big collaboration all of us did with Daniele.
Yes.
For History on Fire, called The Ripples of History. And my friend CJ, who does Dangerous History podcast I was talking about earlier, he did this like 25-minute, 30-minute part about Bacon's Rebellion. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know where he was going with that. I thought he was just going to say what I've heard said before, that, it laid the groundwork for the revolution. It kind of did. But what he did was he flipped it and said, no, what this is how we institutionalize racism in our history. Because what they did after Bacon's Rebellion, which was a multiracial, uprising against the wealthy, to keep it from ever happening again, they leaned into racial differences. The elite did. And they basically never let whites and blacks work together or live together again after that. It was a very interesting take. I don't know how accurate it is. I choose to believe it because I like it. I think it's a very interesting take. I do recommend people go back and listen to that, because it was a very interesting way to sort of see how arguably our society, at least into the 19th century, was shaped by this one little event that was very monumental in general.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was cool. And Daryl Cooper's really fun one about how jihadist suicide bombing comes from a crazy Japanese anarchist woman or something, which I thought was pretty interesting. There's a lot of really good ones in there. I do recommend that episode. But I like that we have this community, we can call it. calling it a community. But I like it. I like it though.
Maybe we can wrap on a positive note.
Yeah.
Because I'm getting people that comment on my videos all the time saying, they don't teach history in school anymore, which is not true. It's just
they do.
They do. It's just not always not always well done.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I mean, we live in an age where the access to information is really at a reach that never has been before.
Yeah.
So, whatever gaps there might be in entertainment or whatever gaps there might be in education can be filled with podcasts.
With us.
Where you can get these little things. Or maybe, in the education system, you can't teach everything.
No, there's limited time too. I mean,
there's limited time. You're basically teaching a framework. You're hitting the high points. And then these other resources that are out there, that can fill in the gaps. So
I just like how you put that, because I remember having trouble explaining when I was talking to CJ when he interviewed me recently. Like I was having trouble explaining what History Impossible is, and like what the goal is. And the goal is to just, tell some weird, crazy stories that, bust apart preconceived notions and all that good stuff about history. But I think we just nailed upon the best short answer for what I think all of us are trying to do in a lot of ways. And that is to fill in the gaps, the historical gaps that seem to be especially prevalent today.
Yeah.
About history. So I'm glad that we could end on a really positive note there, because I was worried I was going to just be mad when this was over. So yeah.
All right, man. Well, yeah, I appreciate what you're doing. You got good stuff, and
you too, man.
I've benefited from it a lot. So
it'll be
good work.
Yeah, thanks, man.